You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Everyone, and welcome back to our mission briefing, Revivals James Bond month. This week, of course, we're talking about From Russia with Love, and if you haven't noticed, I might release these a little bit more frequently to keep our, rerun numbers up. I like having these in our feed. People seem to like them, and of course, I love Bond, man. This is probably the one I've rewatched the most recently and absolutely fell in love with it again. I believe it's Daniel Craig's favorite, and someone else, maybe Pierce Brosnan's favorite. Anyway, thanks to all of you who came out to see Red Dawn with Cineprov, and I was in the audience with you that time, but it was a good show. I hope you enjoyed it. Also, we're performing at Atlantic Comic-Con, but not doing a traditional show in July, it looks like. So if you're going to Atlantic Comic-Con, I'll be there. Otherwise, thank you. Twitter, Facebook, iTunes reviews. I haven't plugged the iTunes reviews recently, but it really does help us. So thanks for those of you who have already done it. There's like 50 reviews, but we can always use more, and it really does bring attention to our show. So thanks, and enjoy From Russia with Love and the old mission briefing.
From Russia with love.
Do you like scary movies? Well, we do too.
That's why the Spooky Dudes are talking horror movies every single week.
We discuss the latest in horror news and review a different film in each episode.
We'll bring you our opinions on the classics, the new stuff, and a little bit of everything in between.
So if you enjoy horror movies and lighthearted fun discussions, check us out, the Spooky Dudes podcast, right here on the ESO Podcast Network.
From Russia with love, I've seen.
Welcome to Mission Briefing.
Welcome back. This is episode 2 of Mission Briefing, our myopia spin-off podcast where we talk about Bond, James Bond. This is the week where I get the line because Sean Connery didn't bother to take it, which is a real shame for all of us. But we should introduce our panel, rather. I'm Nick Hoffman, editor-in-chief of Dude Letter and host of Myopia Defend Your Childhood. And on panel, we have our Bond experts of
John
and
Mark.
And this week, unfortunately, Matt isn't here, so we have our Timothy Dalton. We have
Thomas Herman, host of the Geekly Oddcast and of the Brothers Herman.
Excellent. And so, again, since we have our first little change to the formula, whenever one of us is not able to come, hopefully Thomas will be able to fill in as our Tim Dalton type. We might end up having a Lazenby, but God forbid. Before we get too far off track, which will happen, trust me, we're going to start with our cold open and follow the chronology of this movie. So, gentlemen, who wants to take a crack at explaining the cold open here?
It's kind of hard to describe because it feels like some of the other cold opens, like I think specifically in Goldfinger, where he's like, climb, you have Bond show up, climb the fence and all of that, but it's not really what's happening because you do see who you think is James Bond, like going through a garden looking for someone, but that's not at all what is happening.
Right, so it opens with this very suspicious-looking blonde man who is stalking what looks to be James Bond through, I guess, a hedge maze?
Yeah.
And then they kind of hunt each other down in the hedge maze, and then the blonde man gets the final say with his garrote wire, and we all gasp, James Bond's dead, but no, it was a man in a mask. All training.
This, to me, is fantastic. Like, we don't get Bond, like, you're right, we don't really know the formula yet. Maybe Bond dies at the end of movies and they're getting it replaced constantly. Who knows? Like, Sean Connery was introduced, kinda. But, like, to me, this is cool because you would expect this to happen after the 5th movie or something, where they really change the formula around. But, like, we essentially start with the most dangerous game man being hunted by man. And then it just turns all of a sudden into, oh, this is just practice. This guy's one thing in life is killing James Bond. And that's awesome.
And I'm sure we'll get to it later, but it just seemed like this guy was the blonde guy, the assassin.
Robert Shaw.
His whole thing is to kill James Bond, and he killed a guy who looked like James Bond. So that does it, apparently, in the training.
Yeah.
As long as you look like James Bond, that's okay.
That's Spectre's commitment to realism in training.
But I mean, it's so funny because you could have just gotten a tall guy of the similar build, right? But literally he has to, and I actually am curious about this, but this is the same era when the Mission Impossible TV show is going on, right?
Yes.
And so it's like the rubber mask coming up. Like, it's one of these things, like, this is when clearly Bond is big enough that it's influencing other things, right? So I don't know if Mission Impossible came first or it's just kind of doffing its cap to the other spy series going on. But this hedge maze reminded me so much of The Shining, which comes out in the 70s, where it's dark, it's day for night even, and they're just hunting each other through this hedge maze, which is incredible. And then the second the guy gets garroted, the beams throw up, like all the searchlights come up, and it's just like, oh, everyone's like, yes, well done. Well
you
done.
realize it's more like the Hunger Games, where there's a group of people just watching this.
Yeah.
And it's such a great sequence, and it really does set up a lot of even future Bond things, because the funhouse scene in The Man with the Golden Gun is very much like this as well.
And as you said, it's kind of wonderful because this is the second movie. So in doing this right off the bat, if this was, the fifth movie and you killed, Sean Connery in the beginning of the movie, you'd be like, yeah, he's not dead. This is something else. But in the second movie, it does kind of leave you, if no credits, no trailers. Wait, what just happened? What did I watch? For this brief moment, just long enough for you to believe it, they have you wondering, wait, did they just kill Bond? And then they take it away before you realize, no, that can't be possible. But they have you in that moment just for a bit.
Well, and just a thought before we move on, because I could talk about this cold opening forever. It's awesome. But you realize this is the 60s. It was really difficult to say, rewatch a movie, like rewatch the previous movie before this came out. And so it's giving you a lot of credit to say, oh, this is a revenge killing for Dr. No, which they bring up later on. They say, because this is where we get Spectre and Blofeld, and Blofeld goes, we're not going to let what happened to Dr. No happen again. And so you're like, oh, wait, this is the assassin who's going to fix the problem. Bond has made such an impact that he is now this guy. He's public enemy number one after the first movie, which is great. But like this opening explains none of that. It's just Bond being hunted and Bond being brought down, and you're like, oh, wait, he gets beat up a lot in the first movie. He could have actually died. Right?
Yeah.
But then the music flares, and we end up with our music video opening sequence.
Belly dancing.
And I know that there's like SAG requirements to explain like who the actors are, who the director is. So they're projected on top of a woman who is belly dancing.
I don't actually, from what I remember, because this is what, and I don't mean to jump out of Bond here, but this is what got Lucas kicked out of the Directors Guild. It wasn't SAG requirements. That just meant somewhere in the movie you had to give credit. It was specifically like the Directors Guild requirement that they'd be at the beginning.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Really? But this is just very cartoonish the way it does.
Yes, it was.
It's a Bond requirement that the 007 be right on that one lady's chest.
Well, of course, yeah.
Shimmy.
Is it the same woman who does the belly dancing in the gypsy camp? I think it is.
It might be.
She's the one named woman, like Layla or Lita or
something like that.
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah,
I love that.
Because I remember seeing the credit is like, doesn't she have a last name? It's just she's like Prince or Sting,
or Cher or Madonna.
Cher, yeah.
I do want to say we don't usually talk about the credits other than, well, this one has two things that are firsts. First of all, we introduce Blofeld. But Blofeld here is so secretive, it's just a question mark. John pointed this out. In the credits, it's just question mark, which is awesome.
Ernst Blofeld is question mark.
Question mark, which is great. And then second, it says Bond will return in the Ian Fleming story, Goldfinger, which is awesome. And we'll get back to that because the ending of this movie is weird.
And could you do that today, even? Sorry to get on a tangent here.
Specifically what? Just do question mark? Or
I feel like that would totally be defeated.
No, you would have to say who he is. If he had a speaking part.
No, occasionally you still have people in movies to this day where if you pull up the IMDb, it'll tell you who it was, but it'll go uncredited.
Oh, yeah.
That does happen. It's rare, but it does happen.
I wonder if they knew who the voice was going to be, because we have an actor who plays it, and it's the same guy who played Professor Dent.
But it's a different voice. It's a
Yeah.
Viennese actor who played. I can't remember his name. You probably have it in front of you.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah.
I do also like the director here is the same one who directed Dr. No and also directs Thunderball eventually. Anthony Dawson is the guy. But anyway, we should talk a little bit about this music sequence. It's interesting because there is a song from Russia with Love, which sounds like it's by a Rat Pack style crooner. You know, it's very from Russia with Love, but that doesn't come in until later.
Yeah.
This is an orchestral piece written by John Barry.
And it does like Dr. No, where it switches tempos. So
Yeah,
it goes from the orchestral slow, like From Russia with Love kind of crooner thing, and then it jacks it up to like a dancer type thing.
Well, no. If you go to the opening sequence, from what I remember, it kind of starts with this kind of alluring to start, like to go with the whole belly dance, and then a little bit past the midway point, it shifts back to the Dr. No theme. You know, the James Bond theme that where it goes and it has that kind of pick up and go. So you get a key shift, and then it goes off. And it was kind of an interesting way to meld the two together, because they didn't have a formula yet for how they did this. So,
well, and I, again, hell, if I were John Barry, I would put the Bond theme in everything because it's great. Although we'll get to the sound cues here. Some of them are weird. Like it'll strike up when Bond is going to answer a telephone without. Like, it'd be one thing if it were like Inspector, where we know Blofeld's the one calling Bond. But here it's really just the front desk calling, and he's like, da 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 da. Yes, I'd like breakfast tomorrow. Da da da. Like, it's just, but it's funny. Like with Dr. No, it was just colorful dots floating around, like something out of a '70s kid show. Here, there's something happening. You have the woman who's not even in silhouette. She has essentially a gold filter on, and they're projecting on her the opening credits. So we're like 2/3 of the way there. I didn't realize this would be such an evolution as to how we get to the modern sequence, but it's something.
It's pretty clever, really.
Yeah.
That if you're going to show credits and you want a belly dancer during the credit sequence, you may as well just show them on her.
Well, and it also works very well because for the titillation for the audience, instead of just having the credits overlaid on like just as being printed there over the image, being on the form and then playing around with that was actually kind of funny without obscuring what you wanted the audience to see.
Because she would move in and out.
Yes.
And you wouldn't be able to see it.
Exactly.
And then she would,
I think, too, it's sort of like setting up... There's a lot of this that's the sort of exotic East. It's from Russia. It's like way out there, and they kind of touch on all those. There's Turkey, and you see a lot of Istanbul.
Well, yeah, because that was the midway point for everything that came through for a lot of it, like Istanbul being that.
So I think it kind of tries to establish that exotic, cosmopolitan, exciting.
Because my first question, like, if I went into this not knowing anything, my first thought is this movie is From Russia with Love, and the title credit has a belly dancer, a Turkish belly dancer.
Right.
Where is this going?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to both of your points, we have no idea where it's going. Like, the idea is that it's kind of foreshadowing there. But we'll get to it in a second because, Mark will give us our kind of plot in a second. But I do like that we get the mic drop title scene. Like, the title, right, is what he writes on a photo for Moneypenny. Mm-hmm. From Russia with Love. Like, that's so great. Like, we don't have a line. We don't have a line reading. It's like, it's not the name of the secret satellite like in Goldeneye. It's just what he writes because he's flirting with Moneypenny. And actually here, he's actually flirting with Moneypenny, which is great. I mean, again, it just, it feels so vintage Bond. And when we were watching the movie, Thomas brought up that this is Daniel Craig and Roger Moore's favorite?
No, Timothy Dalton.
Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig's favorite Bond movie. And you can see why. Mm-hmm. Like, this really... Bond here is, on one hand, an actual agent who matters. He's figuring stuff out. He realizes he's a pawn in a game the whole time, but things happen to him. He has to play the game. And it actually... He's not invincible either. It's a well-put-together movie as well. This is Terrence Young's second. He'll end up making 3. And I think it's probably the best of the ones he directs. But before we get too far out of sync, Mark, will you give us the plot?
All right. So the basic plot here, Spectre, who we sort of met or heard about in the previous film, is setting up this whole plot to get their hands on a Russian cryptography machine. And in the process, also eliminate James Bond. the plot that they hatch, thanks to a chess grandmaster who's orchestrating all of this, because who else could do this better than a chess grandmaster?
Nobody does it better.
Is that they are going to pick a Russian secret operative who works with cryptography, who is allegedly defecting, but they're going to tell her that she is working under KGB orders.
Mm-hmm.
So she is an unwitting pawn, and they know that James Bond is going to be pulled in because they have her tell them that she is just in love with him from his file, I believe, and specifically wants James Bond to help with the defection.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly that's the setup, and it's interesting because they're like, well, the English are going to know that's a trap, and he goes, of course they are, but they'll never let a trap stop
because
them.
they like a challenge.
They like a challenge, and that's the first thing Sean Connery says. He goes, it's a trap, and he goes, we can't pass up what is it, the Lecter device?
The Lecter encoder.
Yeah.
And which is, I mean, it's set up the same way that the German Enigma machine is.
I may be imagining it, but I think I remember Bond saying, this is a trap, and M saying, of course it bloody is.
Yeah.
That's why we're sending you.
We've talked about the different kinds of M's in this franchise already a little bit in the last movie, but Bernard Lee here is just... He's perfect. He's like, of course it's a trap. The Russians are playing the long game. We need to do it too. We're gonna get this machine.
Well, which is great because it's so in fitting with the books. Because I mean, other than changing, the titular bad organization in this movie from Smersh to Spectre, there's no other real change specifically of how most of it flows from the book. They're going for the Lecter encoder. It's kind of this very Cold War style mission. It isn't, some megalomaniacal, madman trying to take over the world. This is just kind of everyday spy stuff.
We need a code machine. Go there and bring it back.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it's wonderfully Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, as Mark brought up, it's what Spectre wants. They want both the machine and to get rid of Bond, who's the thorn in the side, which is wonderful. Playing
both the West and Russia against each other.
Yeah.
Like those fighting fish in the opening.
Oh my goodness. So here we brought up the first time around that Dr. No and Austin Powers essentially have the same plot. Right? Like it's amazing how Dr. No of course Mike Myers is playing Lorne Michaels is Dr. Evil, right? But it's a Dr. No plot, it's a Dr. No setup. However, here, the introduction of Blofeld is like the introduction of every other stereotypical bad guy ever. It could be, Die Hard. Hell, even Naked Gun, the bad guy has the fighting fish. And he gets this long, protracted soliloquy of, the Japanese fighting fish. And you're just, oh my God. And then the balls, Blofeld has the best, he's the one in charge here because the fighting fish are fighting each other. He picks one out with his bare hand and feeds it to his cat as though he's not afraid of anything. He's just in charge, which is awesome. Right? But yeah, we have Sean Connery back as Bond, so I don't think we need to talk about him, at least introducing him as a character, but we should talk a little bit about Blofeld and Spectre here. So how do you guys think this worked out for an introduction to Spectre?
I think it was perfect. You got, like you said, the fighting fish. It's a perfect, I guess, allegory for the West and how Spectre factors into it. That you've got the two great powers fighting against each other, and Spectre is just waiting to pick up the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, in the movie, they're taking a more active role, that they're actively trying to fight them against each other.
Yeah.
I also love, so this is basically our first introduction to Blofeld, and it's very much less is more. Here is somebody we don't know, we don't see but his hands and a cat, and just go through it from there. And it's wonderful because it leaves so much up in the air that it makes you want more. You're just like, okay, where's this guy? And then we don't see him again for 2 movies, I think. The next, you don't see him in Goldfinger. You have to jump ahead. So,
well, and something I really like about this, it's so, okay, let's say we're a modern movie, and well, we have Spectre now, so that doesn't really count, although they screw it up in Spectre to an extent. Or hell, even a stupid movie like Winter's Tale. There's this like, we're going to see my boss. Well, who's your boss? Well, we're going to film him from essentially the torso down, and he's going to be doing something with his hands. But then there's a reveal because it's actually a big actor the whole time. By the end of this, you realize, oh, no. Blofeld's the important part. He could be anyone. He could be anywhere. He could be watching Bond the whole movie, but we'll never see his face. That's why he's a scarier villain in some ways. He's the one who's permanently in control. And in fact, at one point in this opening scene with Blofeld, he mentions someone's name and then corrects it with their number later on. The idea is like, I don't even want to know that much about you. In fact, like he doesn't correct anyone as their boss. He just switches over to start calling the chess master, whose name is Kronstein. He just goes number 5, as though it somehow puts him back in his place, which is wonderful. Like again,
and they call him number 1.
And
I like that it sets up with that cold open that not only are they training people specifically to kill Bond, but they have people on staff, I guess, just to be killed. I mean, I suppose the recruitment angle was that if you're able to kill our guy and survive as the decoy Bond, then I guess you get a promotion or something like that. But...
And there's a scene in there where we're introduced to, I guess it was the assassin or something, and they're going through the Spectre training camp. I seriously thought
Island.
like this, on Spectre Island, and my first thought was, ISIS.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, okay.
But there's support. So you brought it up, that the fake Bond dies. If he hadn't died, maybe he got a promotion, which is exactly what it sounds like. Because later, when they're going through all this training, and Lenya, number 3, goes, they said, all the training in the world is great, except, it's nothing, to bring you up with real, actual, situations. He said, oh, we do live ammo,
targets.
like target practice. And you're sitting there going, wait a minute.
So they have a supply of ready-made, just selected.
Well, they
live
got the
targets,
henchman out of a prison.
Yeah. No, I think he broke himself out of the prison and then they recruited him.
All right.
Yes,
like, can you imagine that? Like, showing up at a bar, so I hear you broke out of prison, and he gets angry and goes, we have an offer for you. And he's like, way back down.
Which I had down as one of the Bond firsts, is sort of the first anti-Bond.
Yes.
Because there's a couple where it's the Bond anti-Bond.
That's actually a great point.
And I thought it was really cool because you felt like he was an established, guy you're going to have to deal with. He's serious business.
Yeah, no, and he is not only... And I mean, to your point, he is an anti-Bond because he's not... He's ripped, but he's not like Jaws cartoony ripped. Right. He's wearing a suit. In fact, I think he only speaks to Bond in the actual parlor scene at the end. Like, for the most part, he's almost silent. Except for his introduction, where we see him, after killing the person in the cold open, he's getting a massage by a woman who strips down to her underwear and starts lubing herself up. And then number 3 shows up, right? And she's this woman who's, God, a foot shorter than him, at least. And has a little old lady purse wearing a very Soviet suit. It's very tight-fitting, very drab. Pulls out of her purse brass knuckles, punches him
in the stomach, like dead there, like a gut punch.
And then the solar plexus, and he just doesn't flinch, and she's like, he'll be fine.
He takes it like the Ubermensch he really is.
He is.
That was my description. It's like Red Grant, the Ubermensch, is exactly what he is.
But I remember seeing it before, and in my memory, he was much more of the giant blonde, muscly guy. Basically, just like the mountain of a guy, but it really wasn't that. I think I just kind of remembered it wrong, or maybe mixed it up with something else.
No, I mean it's like, because nowadays he would be played by Hinks in Spectre, a mountain of a man. Here he's just a little broader in the chest than Bond, but not a cartoon. He's 1960s ripped guy.
Well, it kind of goes back to something we were talking about during the movie, that Sean Connery was a Mr. Universe.
He's a Mr. Universe in the 1950s.
In the 1950s, and so was not Sylvester Stallone, Schwarzenegger. And you compare the two of them at their peak, and they're radically different.
Yes.
Schwarzenegger is massive compared to Sean Connery, who is more that classic, more of a barrel-chested kind of guy, whereas Schwarzenegger is just like muscle upon muscle upon muscle, and that became the Superman kind of hero.
Whereas, like, you look at Bond and you think, this is a guy that, or even today, looks like a special force. Like, this is a guy looks like he could rip you limb from limb, as opposed to a cartoonish Hulk of a man, like Schwarzenegger.
Well, and it has to do with the body shape and just like the general kind of power dynamic. Because at the end of the day, the henchman here, the assassin here, is someone who is a good shot. And when it comes down to it on a train, because of course it's on a train, it's either a train or a hotel room, because we're talking about a Bond movie here. It's fisticuffs. It's really like, it's not someone who's using like special moves or has some sort of injection or no. They're just throwing down in a train car, and you need someone who can throw down in a train car against Sean Connery and make it believable. This is believable. This is an actual fight scene.
Much more believable than I think it would be today, where you would probably be busting through each consecutive train car until you get to the end, and then there's a dramatic fight on the boost or something.
So real quick, for this
or on the roof of the train.
Well, no. Here's something wonderful. So you had a realistic-looking fight, which is something that the Bourne movies gave us later, to a degree. But we actually got to watch this fight. Like, there was at no point where you're actually getting confused or disoriented as you're watching, because the camera work is so ridiculous. You got to watch this fight, and it was chaotic. And the camera work did signify that, but it was completely viewable from end to end. You knew who was punching who and who was getting hit, and all of that from start to finish.
And it felt like an actual fight in a cramped space.
Yes.
Well, it gave it an extra sense of kind of urgency.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes these movies more paced. I mean, that's the end of the movie. We should jump back to the beginning. But one of the first scenes that I pointed out when I was watching this with, I pointed this to Thomas, like the scene when he gets to the hotel room and he's looking around for things. Nowadays, it wouldn't be a montage, but there'd be a lot more cuts. He really just walks around and looks for places to hide a microphone or a camera and finds all of them, because he's just, and it's not like on the first try he just pulls away things. No. He goes to all the paintings, and on the fourth or fifth one, he finds that there's a microphone. He checks the the telephone in the room and can tell that there's static. Like, he knows what to look for, which is what he did in Dr. No. And it's the kind of thing that Daniel Craig really doesn't do, and Pierce Brosnan didn't do, because he was bulletproof, apparently.
Yeah, and I think that too is in the Sean Connery era, he was more of a spy than he was
real spy, not
operative.
A super spy. Yeah.
He wasn't like Splinter Cell. He was like, it was all looking over newspapers and picking out the guy that's tailing you kind of stuff.
This was a gentleman spy game.
Yeah, this is the great game. This is what it is. Before we go too far, we have skipped one of the most important and amazing things in this movie. We're introduced to Q here. We didn't have Q in Dr. No. And his gadget in Dr. No was
a briefcase in this one.
This briefcase is amazing. First of all, it's black leather. And it's funny, like, when I go to work, I have a leather satchel bag, with a strap. I've never wanted a suitcase more, like an actual briefcase more, than when Sean Connery's walking with this black leather case, and you're just like, my God, he's so rugged.
But let's be fair, it's rigged to explode if you don't twist.
Not explode. It's like a gas can.
Yeah,
it's smoke. Yeah.
Either way, I'm pretty sure by Thursday I would have done that myself.
But here's the wonderful thing about it is, like, as you go later in the movies, some of the gadgets in later movies are realistic, and some of them are just, to be frank, absolutely absurd. This is a realistic item. It's a usable item. It has useful things in it.
They just didn't really use it.
They didn't use it, but it was something that you could expect to be given to an agent potentially, because
I liked the gold coins, the sovereigns.
Yeah, right. That was useful.
Because, like you said, it sounds like something that you'd actually give a field agent.
You need money at an emergency. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then they're just like, well, what else would someone need in the field? Bullets. He didn't need the bullets, but it made sense that there were bullets there, that there were knives. And it's a perfectly logical kit, because he's not a Marine in the field who would have like his kit and then his smaller kit for a mission. No. Right. He's a gentleman spy, like you said. So of course he's going to carry a briefcase.
The only ridiculous thing of that item, and it was perfectly logical and usable, was the sniper rifle, because somebody going through that briefcase otherwise wouldn't have found anything else in it.
Yeah.
The charge, the knife, the gold sovereigns, all of that was hideable, even the bullets. But the whole the
It's a
butt
collapsible.
of a gun.
It looked like the butt of a gun.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm not crazy, right? At one point, I don't think it was Dr. No, but a Bond movie I saw recently, so it could be literally any of them. Isn't there a camera that turns into a gun?
Yes. It was Timothy Dalton. It was the
Living
cocaine
Daylights.
one. It was the cocaine one where they were. Yeah, I think it was Living Daylights.
But I mean, like, because like something like that would have been the alternative. If it was like, well, Mr. Bond, this is a Nikon, but it turns into right.
No. It wasn't Living Daylights. It was
The other one.
No.
It was On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
No, it was
The Spy Who
License to
Humped
Kill.
Me.
License to Kill. It was License to Kill. It's when he lost his license to kill because of the whole Felix Leiter incident. That was, I'm pretty sure that was that
The
one.
James Bond meets Jaws incident.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Q comes in, and Q's like, "Well, Mr. Bond, we have for you a
Desmond
briefcase."
Llewellyn, right?
And
Yeah.
this
is his first movie.
This is his first movie, and I think he's only in the Bond movies, except for he's also in Never Say Never Again. I think he's one of the few actors who crosses over because what are you going to do? You're not going to replace Q.
It's not like he has a career outside of James Bond.
No, I mean,
But he does such a good job of sounding like he legitimately enjoys. Hey, look at this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I loved it in this one because their relationship clearly becomes strained, especially when we had like the DB6 that gets destroyed time and time again.
Yeah, because it's always that sort of like he's explaining these dangerous new toys to a child, kind of.
Yeah.
Like, hey, okay, I'm going to give you this, but you need to be responsible with it.
But this time, really, it's the closest we have to equal respect between the two of them because Sean Connery even gets this line where he goes, you turn like the things, the little thumb pads that you use to open the latches, right? You turn them to the right, make them horizontal first, Mr. Bond, and they won't gas you. But if you leave them vertical, they will gas you. And he goes, and so Sean Connery goes, I think I've got it, and turns it and opens it. He goes, good. And he's like, you know what I mean? Like,
Have a cookie.
it's the only time that it's kind of respectful, and Sean Connery looks a little like, you've talked down to me, but I understand why, and I didn't kill myself. Good. Later, if it were a Pierce Brosnan scene, he would do it intentionally wrong, and Q would be like, raising his eyebrows slightly. But if it were a Pierce scene, it would have had a 3-second release, and it would have gone 1, 2. How many seconds was it again?
How many clicks to disarm the bomb?
Exactly. That's what it is. And so here, at least, there was that little bit of that modicum of respect.
But
where
you've
it's like,
also
I
got
think
that
I've got
play
it.
to it that
Yes.
you introduced in Dr. No, where you didn't quite have a Q scene, but you had his new gun, and M was playing Q in that. He's like, throw away that toy; it doesn't work. Use your Walther PPK.
Yeah.
And in this one, it's Q doing the talking down to. It's like, here's your briefcase. Don't mess it up.
Yeah, and I mean, and it works to me because it's another character. It makes sense, and that's why we want a Q. It's why we want a Lucius Fox in the Chris Nolan movies. It's why we want that guy who explains the gadgets, even in Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise.
Or Doc Brown. Like, you need somebody that's going to do some of the explanation to get you through some of it. Like,
And of course, the good part here is Sean Connery as Bond doesn't get it right away. In the fight scene near the end, he's struggling to get the knife out. It's almost in the back of his head. He's like,
To be
I
fair,
wish
he's
this was-
distracted.
Well, I mean, he's fighting for it, but again, hell, even in Daniel Craig, he would have gotten it the first time and stabbed it. Right? It's not. I keep making fun of Pierce Brosnan because Pierce Brosnan's scripts are very uneven. But hell, even Roger Moore would have almost been able to do it with his telepathy and but through a smile. You know, he'd have been like smiled so good it would have. Or hell, we'll make fun of Doctor Who here. The Doctor with his sonic screwdriver would have just been able, knife now. That's the problem. Here, it's like one of those things. When I was a kid, Disney came out with these pencil boxes that had buttons where little things would come out. And here he's like hitting the wrong button. It's as though the CD, right? You remember those? The CD player would have started playing a track and he's like, no, I need the sharpener. That's what it was for that half a second here.
I also like that it doesn't have the feel that some of the other Bond movies have, where they give you this random device and you're like, okay, that's random. And then he follows it to the exact situation where he needs it, and it's sort of like the bat anti-shark spray. Oh, I happen to have some.
it's not a Chekhov's gun just to step in for me.
Right.
Yeah,
This is a
Knife.
briefcase.
A throwing
there are
knife makes
many
sense.
It does.
situations.
You can also put things into this briefcase.
Well, and I mean, again, calling back to another movie, a movie that came out 3 years after this. When I was thinking of it, when he said 50 gold sovereigns, I mean, yeah, I thought the Thomas thing, or Mark, and everyone mentioned this. In the Cold War, you need money to change if you fall in the wrong border. I was thinking of Dr. Strangelove, where they have their emergency kit, and it's like condoms, a Bible, and then gold to change for things. But boy could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with this kit. Like, that's what it is. Like, you know, it's just like, of course, gold sovereign. I mean, hell, I don't even know what a gold sovereign is, but I heard gold, and I was like, coins, hey.
I feel like a gold sovereign would have been one of those old style English monetary
It's
units
exactly
that
what it
would
is,
have been
a
a
sovereign.
telltale thing, like he's working for Britain.
But at the same time,
Something bad has happened.
The wonderful thing is,
It's not like a
yeah,
dollar
he's working
or-
for Britain, but it's a big chunk of gold, so I don't care.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
probably like, well, because pound sterling is silver. So if it's a gold sovereign, it's what, 20 sterling?
Yeah.
So that's a lot of money. Yeah.
Because this was back when the pound actually meant something.
Well, and before they set it to like the gold like before the decimal system, so it was probably like 10, like one sovereign is 20 sterling, which is 200 shillings, which
200.5 shillings.
which
Because
is
it was never even.
right, which is 6 Welsh crumpets, which is which is 50 corgis. You know, if you're using the Queen's currency because she has her own. I don't even know where to go from here. We should talk about Moneypenny because this is probably this is the most we've seen her yet. Bond comes in, he throws his hat on the coat
And
rack,
M is behind the door.
and he has something like, "Well, it was a rough time coming here." Well, actually, before this we need to talk how we're introduced to Bond.
That's right.
This is one of the few times we get a throwback to the previous movie because he's still with Trench.
Yeah, Sylvie Trench.
Right? And they're on a little creek, right? They're being romantic. And this is one of my favorite Bond introductions, not just because he's looking great. He's wearing a terry cloth robe and he's making out, he's first basing it with a woman. But attached to his toe, like he's Huck Finn, is a rope. And at the end of the rope he's not at the old fishing hole. This isn't fish. It's a bottle of Dom Perignon. And he pulls it out of the water by pulling up on his toe to his hand, grabbing the bottle out, testing it against his face. He's like, it's not ready yet, and puts it back in the water. Like, how great is that? Like, it's so simple. And then all of a sudden he gets, his beeper buzzes as though he's a doctor on call.
And what a beeper it is.
It's massive. You realize technology back in the day. Spycraft was hard because you had to stuff that in your colon. But then he is like, honey, it's the office. And he goes back to his car, which you looked it up. What's the car?
It's a 1935 Bentley 3.5 liter.
And it's beautiful because they have to put the convertible top up on their own with their hands. He calls the office, and it's classic Bond because he's like, M's been trying to reach you all day. Where have you been? And he's like, looking into a previous case.
Or an old
Wink.
case. Yeah, an old case. Wink.
Wink. Did you guys see the previous movie? Wink. And then it goes, give me an hour. I'll be there in an hour. And he looks at her. An hour and a half.
Now about that lunch.
Yeah. She's complaining the whole time. She even takes the phone away from him and goes, you promised me lunch. He won't be in yet. And he's just like, are you kidding me? This is one of the few movies where not only do we see Sean Connery slap a woman, he slaps a woman at least 3 or 4 times. This is amazing.
Yeah.
So in case you don't realize, one of my colleagues on this panel looked at me like, are you crazy? In an interview with Sean Connery in Playboy in the 70s, he goes, I think it's okay to slap a woman. So Sean Connery is just one of those people who gets this connotation.
One of those
guys. And by this point, he had left the Bond franchise, but was going to come back to challenge Octopussy in the 70s. So he's like, yeah, I think it's okay to slap women. Da-da-da-da. Again, if it was his ringtone, it would fit for Sean Connery.
The sound of a slap or the James Bond theme?
No. You get the text is a slap if it's from a woman, and then when his response is the theme, just da-da-da-da. And then Smirnoff gives him another $500.
But it's still interesting that this is one of the few Bond movies where you actually do get that reference to a previous Bond movie. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially a recurring Bond girl.
Yeah.
And I don't know any other Bond girl who actually does that.
It was 6 months since the last time we saw you. I'm sorry. You went to Jamaica or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a full
Yeah.
reference.
Yeah.
But it's this world that they're creating in this movie, which is Bond. Like, really, because in fact, the first movie, he doesn't ask for a driver, and so the fact that a driver comes for him, he knows something's up. But this time you have that dialogue back and forth, right? Where he's like, I need a light.
Do you have a light? Do you have a match?
Yeah.
I have a lighter.
I prefer
Even
a lighter.
better. It's like, until it goes wrong, and it's just this back and forth.
And then he
and
just says, he sticks out his hand like, I'm Bond. But unfortunately, we don't get the Bond James Bond.
nope, not at all.
To the listeners, that is as he arrives in Istanbul
Yeah.
for his mission.
Is it Constantinople?
I don't know.
It's not our business.
Constantinople.
You have to
It's
take that up with the
it's
Turks.
just the
Yeah.
Turks.
Nerd.
Yeah, with those BCG.
Anyway, the
glasses.
mission.
The mission. So we get the mission. And like Mark explained the plot, it's excellent. He sits down with M, and M says, "We need you in the field. We know it's a trap. We mentioned this earlier. It's clearly a trap, but you need to go because this is worth your life." And Bond doesn't. Well, again, gentleman spy. If it's my life, it's my life. We need that device. It's worth it.
And actually, I wrote down under the assignment thing here for us was, go sex up this girl for England.
For England. And in fact, the
I like
whole...
how he's like circumspect about it. He's like, I don't know, this sounds like a trap. And he looks at the picture. He's like, oh, okay. All right.
Well, and it's fun to me.
Try.
For England. I'll think of the Queen the whole time.
I'll keep my end up. There we go.
I do want to say this is fun too for me on this end, because it's a parody in some scenes, because she has the same scene in reverse. Because the whole time she doesn't know that her boss is turned to Spectre, right? So we have the same scene in reverse where M is a male talking to Bond as a male, saying, you know, she's pretty attractive. You can make this work, right? And so she has this scene where she sits down with number 3, who she doesn't know is working for Spectre. She still thinks she's with Smersh or KGB, but they couldn't say KGB, right? And he goes, how many women have you been with? Or how many people have you been with? 3. According to your record, you've been with 3 men. Could you be with one more? And she's like, that's inappropriate. She goes, this is for Russia. I think you can be with one more.
She was extra creepy about it too.
No, it wasn't.
I wrote this down.
Yeah,
go
no.
ahead. Go,
She
Mark.
was like borderline coming on to her. I was like,
Wait,
what,
she
am
put
I
her
supposed
hand
to-
on her knee. It was
Right.
creepy, really.
Very aggressive.
In the
Yeah.
first movie, Dr. No has this thing with his hands where they're so strong they crush things. It's as though you can't touch people. Here, it's as though Ian Fleming, because this is very close, as you mentioned, to the book, had a thing against lesbians. And this is her thing, right? Like, almost all the villains have a thing about them that's wrong, right? And I saw this, and it was like, she's not giving her a mission. She's coming on to her. Because the first thing is like, you're a cryptographer, you've worked in the field, you have a little bit of training, and you're very attractive. And you're just like, wait,
Right.
what is going on here? Because M doesn't go, Bond, you're looking good today. Are you going to bone a chick? And like, because that's not what happened. But that's what the KGB woman says.
Plus, she wears like the uniform and everything like that. It's very.
And the
then-
only thing she was missing was a riding crop. She did have a cane.
She did have a riding crop.
No, it was a cane.
It was a cane.
It was a
Oh.
full cane, as I said. It was,
Although I will say, the first thing she says to the agent Tatiana is, take your jacket off and turn around for me. Right? Like,
Right.
And it's a sheer shirt, and you just see the bra, like, as she goes around, you're just like, oh, something's happening here. It's cold in Russia.
To be fair, this is a mission where they need to lure Bond based on the woman's request. So she has to be a good-looking woman.
You mean when Ali goes back to the salt mines? Because that's going to come up soon.
no, or you mean
That'll come up, yes.
Something came up.
But she has to look good for this to be pulled off.
Well, Bond made a quip about that later, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bond ends up in Istanbul, not Constantinople, because it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. Been a long time gone.
In Constantinople.
And then he meets his ally. Like I said, they get to Bond arrives, and you have this scene that comes up again and again. He has this interaction, this conversation, this recorded thing where he has to make sure that the guy is the actual driver he's supposed to meet. And then a guy in a beret and glasses shows up, and you're like, well, he's suspicious. Which leads us to the first quip I wrote.
No
down.
one wears a beret in Istanbul.
Right. Which is the first one. He goes, is it traditional that people follow you in Istanbul. He goes, actually, here it is. Right? Like, that's the line.
Yeah. This is literally the game. This is
the
how
game.
it's played as it's being played. It's like,
it-
this is Mr. Joe. He follows me on Tuesdays and Thursdays
Right.
in this car, so it's okay. I got this.
And to me, it's possibly the best quip of the movie, if only because Bond thinks he's being clever and noticing something that the driver hasn't, and the driver's like, oh no, we're used to it here, right? Like, that's wonderful.
And I like the parallel to Dr. No, where he gets in the car and the guy's been sent to kill him and is sort of sweating bullets and kind of not the greatest of henchmen, honestly. I mean, he's kind of easily sniffed out by Bond and taken out.
Yeah,
Maybe
no.
like a road bump, speed bump there.
Mm-hmm.
But in this time, it's like, no, we're already all engaged in all this crazy spy stuff.
This movie is great because we already know that Bond is fairly competent. We've seen one previous movie, and he does some impressive things throughout this, but he is not surrounded by incompetent people. The people around him know what they're doing too,
Yeah.
and they're all hats at it too.
And they're also related.
Yes, it's all in the family.
So almost all the secondary spies in this are related in some way, usually a son
Yeah.
to, what's his name? Karim
Ali
Bey.
Rahman Bey, yeah.
Yeah.
Kamen Bey.
Kamen Bey, yeah. Who is the Turkish contact for the British Embassy or British whatever.
Yeah.
He's the chief British intelligence analyst.
Yeah.
In Turkey, or in
And
Istanbul.
So he's our man in Istanbul.
He's our man in Istanbul.
And it's great because in fact it's yes, he's the MI5 whatever, MI6 whatever, but he's like, I don't know, here us and the Russians have a détente. It's a different game here, Mr. Bond. Like, and again, it's one of these interesting things where we have this ongoing list of things Bond knows, right? And he was explaining in the last one toppling, which is how you disrupt the missile. Here, he doesn't know much. He just knows that the decoding device, what it's called, but other than that, he's not like, well, we're 90% of the way there thanks to Turing or whatever. Like, we don't get many of the details. The only thing we know here is that the Dom was not cold enough yet, right? Here, he just kind of falls into things, and it's Kamen Bey who's the one who's like, well, this is how the Cold War works in Turkey. We'll hit them, they'll hit us, back and forth, but Turkey's a neutral place. That's why it's interesting, right?
That's kind of my biggest. I think it's the biggest pro and the biggest con to this movie. That I said earlier that this is like a John le Carré movie.
Yeah.
This is a spy movie, and Bond happens to be in it. In this movie, things happen, and Bond may help with it, but he's not the center of attention. Whereas in subsequent Bond movies, everything happens around him. Like we said how in Goldfinger, he just stumbles upon the plot and happens to just bumble his way through it, and that's certainly the 70s Bond movies. But in this one, he's got actual quality people working with him who set these things up, and he just kind of has to wander through it competently.
He's really only there because they specifically ask for him, right? I mean,
Exactly.
It's not like they chose him because he had a certain set
like
of
they
skills
find the
that were-
lector because that's where the spy Tatiana said it would be,
Yeah.
and they happen to have a periscope into the embassy.
Yes,
Like,
from this angle, things are shaping up nicely.
Quip number 2. I wrote that one down. Okay, so there's two things we got to talk about here. First of all, it's interesting because, yes, you're right. Bond is asked there specifically, and so as a spy, he has to do his spy thing. So it's not like, again, the next one where he's just, I'm on vacation, my God, things are afoot. Things are afoot. But by the, but here he's just like, well, I'm the agent in the field. I have to get shit done. Fine. I get that. But again, part of this great game that's playing out in Turkey is that Kamen Bey has this, it's literally a periscope. He's like, well, we convinced the city planners that there was a foundational problem. By the time they were done fixing it, I had this periscope installed thanks to your British Navy.
Because, of course, the Navy had a periscope just lying around.
As they do. And the other thing I liked about this is it still raises the tension. If it were the same movie being remade, which, if again, Casino Royale is rebooting the series, they're going to eventually redo something like this. Ultimately, that what they're going to do is make this movie again. So how do you remake this movie? You're going to end up with sound in something the size of not even a postage stamp, the size of a pinky nail.
But I think what's wonderful about the Periscope is it's you have all these gadgets. It was even better than what you can do now. Is because it's analog. It's something you can't detect. Like so, Bond goes around. He finds the interference on the phone using a device. You're not going to be able to do the same thing and find a Periscope. Whereas
but that's my point. Nowadays, you could just have someone who slips something like microscopic almost and records sound and video. So here, the idea that, well, we have this weird little Periscope thing. It's half behind the wall, so no one notices it. And we can see these 4 people being yelled at and this one woman. Do you recognize these people? There's no digital. There's no audio. He goes, I wish we could hear, but we can't. All we can do is see. It's this wonderful little game that they have to play. And so Bond has to crack the code. Like he is required actual spying. Something that's a problem with the modern movies. It's too much digital. It's luckily Q is incompetent.
Honestly, on their way to the Periscope, they went through the what were they called?
The catacombs. I don't know what you would call it, but
it was a reservoir, like the Constantine reservoir, or whatever it was. It was an Ottoman, or not an Ottoman, Byzantine reservoir. I half expected them to pass the Russian agent going the opposite way to his own equivalent.
Yeah.
Because that's just how this game is played.
It's like Cold War Berlin, where they're just looking at each other on the other side of the gates. Yeah, the checkpoint Charlie. And you realize this really was a movie where everything was... It's not even red herrings. It's just like, this is your field kit. There's talcum powder he never uses. This is the way the game is played. We're going to be listening and watching each other all the time. In fact, if Spectre hadn't shown up, it would have not have been a movie. Not because Spectre needed the movie, but because the KGB really was watching the British, and the British were really watching the KGB. It was just a balance of power. And the whole thing Spectre does is try to throw off that balance. Because the movie, like, the first scene in Istanbul we get is Bond talking to this guy, Kamen Bey, and then the assassin who's there to kill him kills a KGB agent, knowing that the KGB will then assume it's the British and have to kill one of them.
So just a quick, I definitely agree. It's kind of a great way of putting it. Just to clarify, so we don't have somebody popping up in the comments who wants to kill all of us. Was it Kamen Bey or Karim Bey? I thought it was Ali Karim Bey. Or did I have that wrong?
I could just call him a Bey.
I'm not touching that.
I thought it was
Karim Bey.
Karim Bey. I thought it was
okay.
R.
Yeah. All right.
I maybe was hungry and wrote ramen and then put a K at the beginning. I'm just gonna throw that out. But yeah, no, I'll say Karim Bey. That's fine with an R.
Kerim.
Karim. Yeah,
Karim
Bey.
Bey.
Okay, all right.
So after the first night in this, of course it's Bond. So there's a scene in a hotel, and it's a spicy scene because Bond goes, "I don't think this room will do." And when the room doesn't do, he's the listener who's working for, I assume, the KGB. It's Smersh. It turns out, though, that people in the other room are working for Spectre, so who knows? He goes, well, the only other room that's available, she, because it's got to be a woman, and a woman has to be told what to do by a man who's in the background, goes, there's only one room available, the bridal suite. And he goes, that'll do.
Well, let's see it. They might like it.
Mm-hmm.
And what he sees, he does like.
Because there's a lady in the room.
Because he ends up...
Yeah.
There he is getting naked. He goes in the bathroom and starts getting naked and turns to take a shower. We know he's going to take a shower because he turns it on, but the water doesn't come out of the spigot, but we hear the sound because Foley effects.
Steam came out.
Steam does come out.
Yeah, Steam, yeah.
And he drops... the second he drops trow, hears a thud. And he's like, all right, then I'm going to keep getting undressed. Puts a towel around his waist, goes into his pants in the other room, and grabs out his Walther, looking around for someone, right? Through some glass, we see a naked woman jump into a bed.
Tail.
Yeah. And it's possibly the most gratuitous nude we've seen, if only because, at watching it on Blu-ray, she's naked, walking into the bed. Which I don't know if the 1960s was aware of, but people got naked sometimes.
What?
Scandal.
What?
Scandal. It's a PG-rated movie, kids. We're okay.
I saw some butt.
You did. And because it's a list here, we already saw Rolls Royce, which is a beautiful car.
Yes.
So long story short, he hooks up with this woman who turns out to be Tatiana, who is the Russian spy who has been convinced to turn over, right? They start making out. They zoom out, and we see people filming them having sex, which matters later, actually.
Much
But
later.
seemed odd at the time.
Which seems awkward, yes. Although it's something that they call back to several times, including Pierce Brosnan, where he punches through a wall in Tomorrow Never Dies, including Roger Moore in something I'll remember later, and I believe Daniel Craig at one point. But it's interesting to see him at a moment of being Sean Connery, hooking up with a lady where people are taking advantage of him when he doesn't even think to check. Considering that we get him to the hotel room and he checks every corner of everything, and here he's just like, all right, time for a boner.
He got caught with his pants down. I mean,
wearing a kilt or towel kilt. And this advances the plot in some way. Which, yeah, I know. I'm going through my notes too. I have a lot.
Well, it gets the setup to Tatiana, who is going to hand over the cipher device, and he makes plans with her to hand it over on the 14th or so. He tells her, and then works out a plot with Kareem to instead actually grab it on the 13th.
And I do want to say, what's interesting here too is that she is never part of the game, because Bond, in some ways, I don't want to say is treating her as an equal, because this is the 60s and she's a woman, so he's going to take advantage of her. But he's like, well, she's made this agreement with me. We're going to play this a certain way. And he's like, well, tomorrow we're going to meet, and we're going to pretend that we're tourists at the Hagia Sophia, right? And so they go there to make this weird handoff, because the idea is that we're going to be in public together, right? Because like there's this game that they're playing where like before, like she makes a move on him and he's like, well, what about the device? And she's like, is that all you're going to care about? And he goes, yes, because I'm on a mission, which is something we don't get in later Bonds. And he goes, he's like, all right, tomorrow we'll meet at this place at this time and we'll talk about the information. What she slips him is the blueprints, like how to get to the thing. To the device, but he doesn't trust her because it's still a game that they're playing, and so he has Karim get the blueprints anyway, right? Did you have something?
No,
I'm sorry.
Carry on.
And he verifies what he gets from her. I forgot about the whole blueprint.
Yeah.
But he verifies so that they know where it is, because as it turns out, they're going to set a bomb underneath because they have access to all the sewers underneath.
And so it's an actual, like, there's a game afoot. And so they get to Hagia Sophia, and Bond just pretends to be part of the tour. And it's a great shot because it's one of the few times where, like, this whole movie is ADR and VO, right? You can tell that, like, there are loud scenes where a helicopter is landing and you don't hear the helicopter at all. You just still hear number 3 talking, right? So you know it's all recorded in advance. However, when they're in Hagia Sophia, there's a tour guide who's talking.
And an echo.
And there's whole time that there's an echo in a big empty space. And there's camera cuts. There's no cuts in the audio because he's just giving his tour and they're wandering around looking at stuff. And she leaves this little locket with the blueprints on how to get to the thing. And another guy reaches for it, but by the time Bond gets there, he's dead. And so he realizes there's someone else afoot, and he just assumes it's Smersh. But it's great. Like, again, Bond is a step behind the whole time, trying to figure out what's happening and not telling Tatiana anything because he assumes she's in on it, which is amazing.
Because at this point, he still believes that it's Russia versus the West, whereas actually there's Spectre interfering with everything.
And this sets up too. I think, did we skip over the gypsies yet?
No, that's coming.
That's the next scene.
That's the next scene.
But it begins to set up that that Grant, the Spectre agent guy, is basically trying to keep things smoothly going along according to plan.
Yeah,
And we see Grant following him throughout this.
And this is the point where Bond is like, something's weird going on. Because she's like, she can't stay in that hotel room. Bond's like, I can't stay in this hotel again. We've got to figure it out. And he's like, don't worry. Tomorrow we'll stay somewhere else. And then a bomb goes off in Karim's place. And it's great because it's the next morning. And this woman who's just in bed with him goes, come back to bed effectively. And he's like, no, woman, I'm working. And he's reading some sort of dossier.
The best part is like she keeps calling him back, like stands up, straightens her dress, is rubbing her hands over herself, and like tries to get him and goes. Then he takes off his glasses, puts down his papers, and goes, all right, back to the salt mines.
And then a bomb explodes.
And then he goes over to her. So the assumption isn't that his work is his work. It's pleasing her is his work, and everything else.
She's like, fine. Moving on. And then the explosion goes off, and I say purple explosion because the explosion is because of a piece of the set falling down, smoke, and then a purple spotlight.
And a flash paper, piece of flash paper going off. Like,
yeah, and then, Karim says, look, I was lucky. I wasn't sitting at my desk at the time. If I had been, I'd be dead. Tonight we're going somewhere else to hide you. And they go to a gypsy camp, and he calls it a gypsy camp. It's a gypsy camp. And he goes, so the big man told me... Brace yourself. Are you sitting down, listener? Because if you haven't seen this in a while, this is the weirdest scene in there. He goes, 2 women are fighting over the same man. They're going to fight about it. Literally, they're going to fight to... I think they say to the death? I don't think it's to the death. No,
to the death. One of them will die because of this. It was to the death.
And so they all sit around this picnic table, this wooden picnic table. They bring out a bottle of ouzo or what, grappa, some rot gut. They all pour a shot. The pre-game entertainment is a belly dancer.
I'm not going to lie. For that scene alone, I honestly think they brought out a professional belly dancer, let her go, filmed her, and at the same time just turned a camera on Sean Connery on the table and watched the reactions of 4 men watching a fairly attractive woman undulate around.
Because the first third of it, he's like very professional, like, I'm Bond, I'm watching out, I'm paying attention, and then all halfway through he just starts smirking and like smiling, like he's all dimples by the end of that dance. And then
at that point you're like, oh, got it. Beginning, belly dancers.
Yeah.
There you
Now
go.
it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Circle.
Segue. Yeah. Sorry, foreshadowing. That was foreshadowing.
Yeah.
And
then things happen.
I was going to say, the first part of it is very interesting because he goes, look, to the British, the gypsies are our allies, just like to the Russian, it's the Bulgars, right? Like he says that at the beginning. And so they're in this gypsy encampment. And looks like they're on the Universal backlot of a Zorro set because it's just like, it's like big archways, it's huge porticos, but it's all broken down. And then you see a couple people get shot, and then you see a guy on the biggest field phone you've ever seen. It's massive. He gets radiation looking at it, and he goes, "Bond has arrived," or whatever he says. We don't really hear it. We just see him whispering into something. All of a sudden.
2 ladies.
No. I was gonna say the belly dancers done belly dancing, and then they open the whatever they are. They're
the trailers, the caravans. Yeah,
the caravans. The 2 women start fighting, and they're like, "Whoa! You got to fight in front of people." Halfway through their fight. In fact, they're almost scratching each other's eyes out. There's a couple great dramatic shots where they're staring into the middle distance with claws over their faces. Then all of a sudden, a shot is fired, and shit starts going down. Right.
These are the first. I mean, this is basically where the start of, other than the death in the very beginning, is when the deaths start. I mean, this
is just mayhem. This is like
mayhem,
most other Bond movies begin with scenes like this.
Yeah.
And at this point, I realized I wasn't actually counting the henchmen, and it was already too late.
Okay,
so I just left it.
I got about 6 or 7 from this scene who died by Bond's hand.
Yeah,
that's what I counted as.
Are you counting the ones where he simply just pushed people?
No, I only
because at one point he takes a knife and cuts the guideline of a tent over, and then people are just done. At one point he flips a table with 2 people who are fighting on
into water.
He's not even trying to pick a side. He's just like, out of my way.
So 5 or 6 I got from specifically his gun going off at someone, and that's all I counted as. And I might have missed a few, but. That's when I was paying attention enough to try and remember that.
But I guess the big thing out of this scene is that during all the mayhem, someone is sneaking up behind Bond, and he pulls a gun on Bond, and yet Grant is watching this, the Spectre agent, and he shoots the guy, and Bond turns around and just sees the guy fall dead.
Is this where he says she should have kept her mouth shut?
No,
that's later.
Oh, sorry. We'll get to that.
That's later because the guy who led the charge is who they then go after this with Korean Bay.
He's the Russian agent.
Yeah.
The Russian, I guess he's a Korean Bay equivalent.
We need to talk about something from the gypsy fight scene. Aside from the fact that this does add to the Bond's 00 count later, is specifically when Kareem Bey gets shot in the arm and he grabs his arm to set off the blood.
The squib. Yeah. So, because Kareem Bey gets shot in the arm and you literally see he gets shot in his left arm and in his right hand you see the squib and he just squeezes it and then he pulls away and there's blood there all of a sudden. It's not well done. No, but it's very funny. And I saw that, I pointed it out. I was like, he did it.
You think it's real blood?
Yeah, no. There isn't even a hole in his jacket. No. It's a blood stain. But then Bond is just walking around shooting people. He has his Walther out. And then up in the
walls?
I was going to say in the clock tower. Yeah. In the Texas clock tower. You have the Spectre agent who is picking people off to make sure that Bond survives the scene. Mm-hmm. And he brings this up later because that's important. But Bond survives, essentially makes it, because at one point there's a guy about 4 inches away with a knife that Bond doesn't sense, then all of a sudden drops dead, and he's like looking around shocked, but does nothing about it and just keeps fighting, which is great. He's still learning his Bond. He's just not... Yeah. He doesn't have, like, Professor X era, like telepathy. I could pronounce things if I spoke English.
Probably the closest. I don't know if I found another one where it's a protracted attempt to kill him.
Yeah.
Just the fact that they're keeping him alive, but that actually kind of makes sense for their plot because they need him.
They need the Lecter.
Smuggle it out.
Yeah,
right?
like they haven't gotten it yet, so he needs to be alive.
Yeah. And it's just. It's interesting because you realize that this movie is driven by Spectre and not Bond. And Bond just eventually takes a turn because he's the one who falls into their hands. He knows he's going to do it, but the whole time Spectre's in control of the events. They end up on the train. They end up inches away from him, and he's suspicious, but not super suspicious. He doesn't take precautions, really. He just starts noticing things are weird, which is what Bond should do.
Because he can't stop the game. Because if he stops the game, everything would just kind of fall apart. He has to just keep going and figure it out as he goes.
And again, we have a rough Bond here, and we'll get to how he tries to get out of being killed in a train car, but it's fascinating. Like, it's just, it lets you know that Bond is not fully in control yet, which is great.
However, at the end of that scene, he is given full control of the two women who were fighting each other to the death. So he's left to...
Because he saved the chief's life.
Quote unquote, sorted out by himself.
So as Nick pointed out when I asked him, because I asked the flat out question, so we see the two gypsy girls are brought into Bond's tent, and he's told they're his. And then we just kind of fade to black as we go around, and we're left kind of up in the air. So the question was, I asked, are these two girls part of the 00 count? Did Bond take this? And said, if so, that takes his count to this movie to 4.
Yeah.
Which would make it the highest for the Connery era in any one movie.
I'd give it.
It doesn't make sense, though, because one of them is supposed to marry the guy's son, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But he's the guy's son now. He was added as a son to the guy.
Okay. Yeah, Mark, I want you to explain to me how, like, does Mark get gypsies? Because I don't at the end of this. Specifically, since the one Turkish guy is played by a Mexican guy, I imagine most of...
I imagine a lot of the Turkish guys are...
I'm probably the closest to this table to Romany Gypsy, and I don't get this.
Yeah, no, this is all like, those people? We'll make of something.
Yeah, sure, there's too many cultures where they're just like, okay, this one of these was going to marry my actual son, so we'll just whatever.
Well, I mean, like, and it's so funny because
not just have one, have them both.
Because like the first half of the scene makes sense. You saved my life. You're part of the family now. I get that. Like it's very mafia. Like you now are part of the family. I get that. Then part 2's like you get to settle that whole who does she get to marry thing now, and you're like, wait, what? Back up.
Because we cut after the fade to black to the two girls. Like one of them is sewing his cufflink, and the other one is fawning coffee or something.
Yeah,
it's weird. Because literally he leaves at the end of the scene, so
they're left like pining after him. Like,
does he actually decide?
No.
If he does, we're not into that.
No. This is. I was gonna say this turned into a '90s movie because everyone won at the end. Sorry, I'm done. Yeah, no, it's a weird scene. But at the end of it, we end up going back to Istanbul to get on a train, right?
The Orient Express.
The Orient Express. And this is where the third act happens, effectively, right? This is the end of the movie. The end of the movie. We're not even.
Hang on. We didn't get the lecture yet.
Oh no, we skipped the. We need to go back to the Russian embassy.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's actually a heist scene in a way that we don't usually get in Bond. Bond walks in.
It's very Ocean's 11.
Very Ocean's 11. Bond walks in with
Asking
his
for
briefcase.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Is that the actual time?" And he goes, "Of course it's the time. It's a Russian clock." And he looks at his watch again because it's a Russian clock, so it's going to be wrong. Actually, and he knows. And he goes,
Are you sure?
Are you sure that's the time? And he goes, "Of course I'm sure it's the time." Another dead second.
What?
And then there's an explosion, and then the plane actually starts. Okay. Someone to do this?
So he walks. The embassy's in chaos. There's smoke. There's sirens. There are people screaming.
And he casually walks downstairs.
He puts on a gas mask as well.
Once he gets downstairs.
Yeah. Once he gets into the actual place, he puts on a gas mask. He walks past all the guards. I think he incapacitates one of them.
He does.
But he just saunters in, grabs the lector.
Grabs the lady.
What's her name? Talia?
Tatiana.
Tatiana.
So Tanya. Well, she says my friends call me Tanya. Is what
Tanya.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that.
So he grabs them both and then meets with Karim Bey in a hole in the ground and walks back into the cistern to escape.
Yeah. And it's cool because it's Bond doing a little thing, like a little mission. Like it's
yeah.
It's a great scene.
It almost feels like you have two movies. The first movie is like a spycraft movie where you're in Cold War Istanbul, and then the last part is like a Bond movie where it's Bond and like an evil henchman on a train and Bond stuff happens. But before that, it felt like just generic spycraft kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
cool.
I want to call you out here because you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Like the chamber drama part of it is very Bond because he's in a confined space, he's outnumbered, he doesn't know who the bad guy is. It's perfect. Now here, of course, this is very early, so there's not constant threats, but there are constant threats, right? Bond, on one hand, seems to think he's gotten away with it, but he's still on edge, like he should be. People keep dying, which is important. And in fact, the people who keep dying, which is what he gets halfway through before he figures out, the people who keep dying are the KGB people, or the Smersh people, technically, not Spectre people. And he's like, who could be killing everyone? Because halfway through, Karim Bey dies, right? Which is
Right,
bad.
after they,
Along with the agent to the commissar for the Russian embassy.
because they take the train to get out of Turkey, and on the train they run into the commissar, and Karim goes and gets the drop on him and is going to sit with him for the train ride to make sure that he doesn't interfere. And you later find out that they're both dead, or as the train conductor, I guess, says, they killed each other, which, yeah, that happens.
Sure.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Considering we didn't hear any gunshots or anything. Like, it'd be one thing if Bond's like, that was a shot. I heard something must have happened. But no, they're just dead in piles. You're just like, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And considering that Karim Bey has made it clear, everyone on this train has been bribed, from the conductors to the porters. Like, he's going to make an awkward stop when someone breaks down, near the Bulgarian border, I think it was.
Yeah.
Which is
The
exactly
Hungarian
what
border.
happens, except it's not the right people.
Yeah, it's not the right people, and Bond detects that right away, which is great. Then it turns into north by northwest for a scene.
So yeah, they're taking the Orient Express out of Istanbul, and they're headed, I guess, to Italy or Vienna or
The
something.
only difference is that everyone didn't do it this time.
Yeah.
And we're heading, we're on this kind of beautiful train ride, and this is another like Bond cliche now, that he ends up taking these incredible like rides across the Middle East, across the West, across North Africa. And what he's doing is he's trying to get this device out of neutral territory through Soviet territory into the West, so he can get this translation device, because he's still playing the game. Not really realizing yet that Spectre's the one who's after him.
Yes.
Along the way, of course, things start going askew. Karim Bey dies along with this head of KGB security or whatever he's called. You said the commissar?
No, he was the agent to the commissar. He's the person that would watch the train stations and the airports for people that they thought were trying to escape. That's,
right.
I think, how they described it.
And we're introduced to him at first through the periscope, and then ultimately they recognize him again in the train station as someone who's trying to get onto the train. He hops on at the last minute, and then he's like a few train cars down. Bond sees him, and they're following each other. It's very spycraft. It's very, like you said, Le Carré. It's very, hell, it's even Alfred Hitchcocky at that point. They're supposed to meet Karim for dinner. Then the porter gets him and goes, something has happened. He realizes he's dead, and he realizes that things have gone south very quickly. From that point on, they end up making one stop, because the idea was they were going to stop near the Bulgarian border, and they were going to hop off to one of Karim's sons. But since Karim has died,
they don't know where to stop.
And so they just keep going to where essentially the train car is going to spend the night, it seems like. It's like one stop way into Europe at this point.
Like Zagreb or something.
Zagreb, yeah. And by the time they get to Zagreb, Bond is off the train with a cigarette trying to figure out what the hell is supposed to happen, sees the other son and goes, look, you got to get a message to MI5 or MI6, whatever. We're going to keep riding on this train. You've got to get me to M. You got to send a message. We got to figure this out. And that's when the assassin gets on the train at the next stop.
Because Bond is waiting for a British agent, and meanwhile the assassin, Grant, has intercepted this British agent somehow.
Yes.
And
in the bathroom.
Took him away and took his place. And so he introduces himself as Bond's contact, who will get him through this whole thing.
And he's playing it up as a guy named Nash, and it's the first time we've heard him speak this whole movie, even though he's
I wish he didn't, though.
I can't imagine what you mean by that.
Come on, old man, let's go. Pip, 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 cheerio.
He's an American playing English, and it's the most...
It's awkward.
Yeah, it's...
Though Bond does make a really great quip about it later when he finally realized I should have known. He said red wine with fish.
Oh. I wrote that one down too. Red wine with fish? I should have known, because he ends up drugging the
Tatiana.
Well, but it's champagne again. It's Dom. It's like clearly a Dom Perignon label, and you're just like, oh, of course it is, Bond. Like, I half expected, I think it's in Thunderball, where he gets sent to a revitalization camp to sober up and stuff. And in his briefcase, he has a bottle of Smirnoff and caviar. And that's what I kept expecting to be rolling around in his briefcase. Because frankly, he doesn't drink that much. And the only product placement, considering last time Smirnoff was so prominently displayed, we at one point get a bottle of San Pellegrino, but it's not even in focus.
Yeah.
So we're just
he doesn't drink much at all, this one.
No, just rot gut and some...
a glass of wine.
A glass of wine.
And coffee.
He's too busy spying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, God, he's actually working in this one.
This is probably the most work that he does in any of the movies.
Yeah, the only cocktail I have written down is gypsy sauce.
A hot sauce for Mystery Science Theater, I guess. Yeah, I didn't have much.
So Tanya is rendered asleep through her drugged champagne, and
Bond is apparently immune somehow.
Bond is somehow immune, and he realizes that
did he poison?
Maybe she just poisoned him,
because he just drugged hers.
It would have made sense to drug them both.
Yes, it would have.
Through subtle clumsiness, the guy knocks over the glass of champagne, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and then drying it up, and then he refills her glass by
roofies her drink.
Yeah, and he pours a little bit, drops in a pill, pours a little bit more, drops the pill, so that they're fizzing at the same time, which is whatever. I assume it was more subtle back in the 60s.
Yeah, I guess.
But yeah, no, it didn't work well.
So she's basically out for the rest of the movie.
What I don't understand is why he didn't just poison her. Why did he need her alive anymore? He only had room to get out for one, and he was going to kill both of them, so why drug her?
Yeah, and I could be wrong.
I guess he couldn't kill her immediately.
That's fair.
Because that would have been obvious. He had to... Because he...
That's fair.
He drags her back to the room saying, oh, she's had too much to drink because she just collapses in the hallway. Silly woman, let's put her down while we have man talk.
Gets it down. one-on-one.
Yeah, one-on-one,
I mean,
and
Yeah.
then we have our chamber scene. Like this is a very Bond scene because he's like, "Oh, you work for Spectre." Like this is where Bond.
Tell me your plot.
Yeah.
If he were the villain,
you
this would
asked.
be the time to do it, and he does. He gives essentially the plot.
He is our villain Bond meeting, right? Because Bond doesn't meet anybody else to have.
Yeah.
I mean,
Whoa.
no. We meet, but not enough to have a conversation with any relevance.
This
So-
is the I'm going to kill you anyway. Let me tell you my plan.
Yeah.
Because he's got Grant has a gun trained on Bond the entire time, and he makes it clear I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill her, and I'm going to take the Lecter, and I'm going to go off to Spectre.
Yeah, and he goes, so you work for Spectre. Like this is where we figure out that Spectre's the game that's actually afoot. That everything else is all. Well, everything else is like. Well, yeah, it's literally you're playing us against them. Spectre wins either way. This is where Bond realizes that Spectre's the game that he's actually going to be put on, which is great. Like, this is a great way to introduce it. Because, again, Bond is the cop in the horror movie that's, like, 5 steps behind. But here he actually catches up. Here he's playing spy, which is fun. Like, this means that we had to be paying attention because Bond had to be paying attention as well. It's not a Pierce Brosnan movie where he knows the whole time what's going on. He just has to figure the right time to shoot the bad guys. This is great.
Well, it goes like we said in the last time that he's the policeman. He's the blunt object in this movie.
Yeah.
That he's not really meant to be super smart. That's what Spectre's for. He's meant to just get things done.
So what did you think about Bond in this scene? I think this is a weird scene for Bond, and I say weird. I think all the Sean Connery scenes are similar to this, but at one point, the guy has a handgun. It's I think it's a 6.7. I could be wrong. I'm not good with handguns. It's definitely Bond makes a point of it because he has 2 guns, right? He has one gun that he has trained, which is a small little, like almost a Derringer, like a little gun.
Well, he has Bond's gun, doesn't he?
Well, and then he has a silencer that he's screwing on so that he can kill Bond quietly, right? But what's interesting here that you don't see a lot anymore is Bond begs for his life. He goes, "Whatever they're paying you, I'll pay you double." Which is this moment where you're just like, oh, Bond is going to die. He knows he's going to die, and now he has to figure out a way out of it. It's the same thing he does with Goldfinger in the next movie.
I thought it was odd because you do see that sort of fear in Bond and the bargaining, and you also, I think, if I remember correctly, he kind of asks about the girl, which isn't so un-Bond-like, but you get more character to him that he cares what happens to the girl in the next room.
But then I think that Bond offers him double what he was being paid.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's got a briefcase full of 50 gold sovereigns. Because his first attempt at bribing Nash, or Grant, doesn't seem to work.
Yeah.
Well,
but
yes,
then he
because-
says, well, like, how about a smoke? I've got 50 gold sovereigns for you.
Well, I think what's great about that is kind of like, bribing him off and Red Grant's response is kind of like, what? And I'm supposed to trust your British,
As a gentleman.
As a gentleman. And it's kind of just a play on the fact you're a spy. Like, come on. But then, 50 gold sovereigns for, a cigarette.
Which is more of a deal.
It's more of a deal. Like, yeah.
I could give you the cigarette and take the gun or the gold and then just kill you.
Well, and the whole thing is great
Makes
because there's a second briefcase which Nash, Grant, whatever, gets because he beats up the other field agent and has no idea what it is. But then you realize the neat part about that, at least in my head, is that Bond isn't special at this point. They just give all the field
Standard
agents.
issue, yeah.
It's standard issue. Again, it's
That's
like
a hell of an assumption though, on Bond's part. That
that's
this
the
was
thing. Well, no, that's the whole
Nash's
point.
thing.
He's not 001. He's 007. He's not the first. He's just another number. It's a different way of numbering agents, just the same way
that's
Spectre
why
does.
Spectre does it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, it's just great. Like, Bond goes, look, let me open the briefcase, and he turns it it's not even suspiciously, it's subtle. He's like, and he opens it up in that weird way you're supposed to do it, and he goes, here's the sovereigns, and he drops it on the floor, and he goes, and the guy goes, Grant goes, are there 50 sovereigns in the other one? And he goes, I would assume so. It's standard issue. And the guy just opens it wrong. It's just this subtle little thing. He could have gone for the talcum powder and done the gas bomb, but he didn't. It's just Bond tricked a guy. It's great. right?
And the gas bomb goes off, and they're able to.
And the best part about it is, if I may, it's not instant kill gas. It's not, if you open it wrong, it's going to send tranquilizer darts into the person. No. It just starts a fight scene because Bond is still on the bottom rung here and has to fight.
All it did is shock this guy who's a lot bigger than Bond, like size-wise. I mean, you look at the two, and there's a size difference there. I mean, so it just gave Bond a moment to take a shot.
Yeah, and
They got the gun out of the way.
Yes.
So they're on more equal footing.
And honestly, he's going to lose the fight up until the last second. They wrestle around, and he actually gets into a position where the bad Grant has the garrote, just like in the beginning, around his neck, and you're like, oh god, this is the end for him. But then he remembers, these briefcases also have that throwing knife, and he is able to pop it out of there and stab him in the arm.
And again, it's so good because other Bonds will screw this up. But like in Pierce Brosnan or Roger Moore, he would be going for it right away, right? He'd be like, this is where I need to go. And like both hands would be reaching. And I'm thinking of the scene in The World Is Not Enough where he's in the chair and he's like desperately trying to reach for, or hell, even in Spectre where he's reaching for his watch. But here, Bond has one hand under the garrote wire desperately trying to regain, keep consciousness. And his other hand is grasping as feebly as possible and just barely gets the knife out. And it doesn't kill Grant right away. It stabs him in the arm, and then he garrotes him, Grant, on his own garrote wire.
Yeah.
With a Bond gadget that Bond doesn't have yet. The garrote wire in the Rolex is something that he'll get later. But here he doesn't have. It's as though he saw it on a Spectre thing and it was like, hey, Q, work on this.
Yeah, make this happen. No, it's great because what is it? In Roger Moore, he'd tapped a button and the knife would have flown out into his hand and then he'd have stabbed the guy. And it would have been so ridiculous. I mean, audiences would have enjoyed it, but it's so unrealistic. Whereas this was,
Or I was thinking of Pierce with the laser watch, and just he would have turned it around and flashed him slightly, and he would have been temporarily blinded, and then Pierce would have gotten the final punch, which Roger Moore never would have wanted. But it's a different game. Here, Sean Connery, again, they're almost the same height, they're almost the same build, and they're destroying this cabin while what's-her-face is knocked unconscious. Because by this point, she's set dressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And he's gone. That's it. He's left unconscious. They pick his pockets a little bit to look for what's going on. Send Spectre's down another field agent.
I don't think he left him alive.
No, he's dead.
Oh, yeah, he's dead. Not just unconscious.
He turns gray like a mask, and then they take the mask away, and it turns out it's Bond the whole time. It turns out Darth Vader was Luke. No one.
Spoilers?
No. Yeah. I was thinking that one scene in the second one.
Empire Strikes Back, with the swamp of Dagobah. Nerd alert.
I thought you were getting onto the conspiracy theories of the new one coming out. But
I haven't even looked at the trailer.
Oh, really?
I can't watch that crap. Because I'm already going to see the movie. Why bother see the trailer for it? Trailer should convince me to see a movie. I'm afraid things are going to give things away.
If it is what you're thinking it is, which they've said it's not, I'm going to kick somebody.
Yeah, I'm going to be angry too.
Yeah. Anyway, Bond.
back on Bond.
Onward, back.
Bond. Yeah, Bond.
Spectre 2 Electric Boogaloo is coming out in 2018.
So he overpowers the guy, takes him out with his own garrote wire.
They get off the train.
Yep.
They get off the train, and there's a flower truck that has been stopped on the tracks. Oh no, I broke down. Better stop the train.
So this is Grant's way of getting out.
Yes.
Right. And he tells Tatiana to, I guess, to stay there.
Well, because she's still pretty drugged out. She's still she sleeps in the back while they roll through the countryside after he incapacitates the driver.
Then he hops on the train and goes 100 yards down the road, and then approaches with
from
caution
behind
because he knows that there's something's up.
Well, yes.
And is able to get the drop on the guys in the truck.
This flower truck. Again,
presumably tells him exactly where they're going.
Yeah.
And
smashes the guy's finger in the hood, which of all the things that have been done to people in this movie, that had to be the one that was like, ooh.
Oh, God. Yeah, because the guy was looking around for Bond or whatever, and to fake the fact that they had broken down on the train track, the hood is up, and so the train has to stop. So the hood is still up after the conductor helps him off the track. And so he has his hand down near the hood of the car, and Bond slams the hood on his hand and then chokes him out, and that's amazing.
And that was the squick moment.
Oh my god, we all winced. Like that's the scene where you're just like, I've closed my hand in something before.
It's relatable. Not all of us have been choked
We've
by
all been
wire,
there.
but we've all slammed something on our fingers.
Well, surprise, your gift for your birthday this year is going to be a garrote wire and a Rolex. or if you're Daniel Craig, an Omega.
So they get into the truck and drive
down
through the countryside to find a boat at the end of the road.
No.
In between.
Oh,
that's right.
Helicopter and a North by Northwest scene, which they admitted was an homage to North by Northwest.
In fact, he even has on the same hat as Jimmy Stewart does, and like it's. But long story short, there's this, the cheapest helicopter you've ever seen, and it gets cheaper when it explodes. But we'll get there in a second.
Oh yeah.
They're running away. Bond gets out of the truck for some reason, which is a Chevy. After it explodes.
And manages to get his sniper rifle, unfoldable sniper rifle, get it out, and starts running as the helicopter starts strafing him from the sky.
Yep.
Which is ridiculous. He's like, wait a minute, you have a gun. Why are you strafing this guy?
And grenades.
Yeah, it's trying to like physically ram him with the helicopter, right?
And so then
which is an improper use of the helicopter.
It is.
So.
I would think so.
You stay slightly out of range and just hit him with things.
And
it's a helicopter. Let's
and
get
so
it with
he
the choppy
manages to
blades.
get himself into this rocky crevice that they have to do a roundabout to get to him. And he manages to put the sniper rifle together, and they're about to drop another grenade, which you're like, wait a minute, if you had this, why were you waiting? And as they pull the pin, he gets his shot off, hits the guy with the grenade, who drops the grenade inside the helicopter, and they start having this little freak out to try and get the grenade, and it goes off.
I two things before we move on from this. First of all, to Mark's point, the whole time I was thinking of that scene in the first Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie where they're on the TGV and the helicopter is trying to get to him, and like literally at points he's against the back of the TGV and the helicopter blades are inches from his neck. Like, because I'm like, that's what you use it for. You tilt down and you cut this tall Scotsman up.
It's like Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yes.
They did the exact same thing. They used the helicopter blades as a weapon.
Yes, that was brilliant.
That's what you do, because it's a weapon.
You don't strafe them.
But essentially they were trying to topple him over as though they had rented the helicopter for the day and they didn't want to damage it.
My favorite part was when the helicopter falls, and then we get to a cut where the helicopter doesn't crash into the ground. The helicopter's already on the ground. They try and splice it together, make it like it hit the ground and exploded at the same time, except it was always on the ground and then it exploded.
Well, and I was going to make a point here because so far this movie has used things like backdrops and miniatures very, very well and very subtly. We pointed out in Dr. No, like how silly some of these little ships looked, like in the bay as they were bobbing up and down. Here, this movie is flawless, but at this point with the helicopter scenes, it goes downhill very quickly. Like
it's almost like they added it at the last minute because of something like North by Northwest.
Yes.
That we need a chase scene.
I think the budget, so this movie cost $2 million to make. Sean Connery's salary went up by about $200,000 for this, or however much they paid him. It was quite a bit. I honestly think by this point you have seen, oh crap, we're out of money.
We're almost like, because at this point, like he says, like Bond shoots the guy through the shoulder, and we've already talked about the cheap squib work earlier. But here, the guy just drops the grenade and it explodes, and it looks like a model, and then someone lit like a little cherry bomb inside of it. But then the model falls to Earth, and like Thomas was saying, there's so many cuts. It's just like, oh, this happened nowhere even close. They didn't even pretend. It was just like, uh-oh, this model is crashing down. And it looks like a toy. It looks like something that Kenner came out with or Hot Wheels came out with. It's amazing. And then there's just burning shrapnel.
Yeah, this little poof.
And by the time that Sean Connery even runs back to the truck, which is a quarter mile away, half mile away, or 100 yards away, rather, it's in the background, and it's clearly changed the quality of the footage. Now, we're watching Blu-rays, or at least I'm watching a Blu-ray, and at the end they even say, updated to 4K, and you're like, ooh, fancy. But it's clear now when there's background work versus actual filming on location. It's very obvious. But now we're screaming towards the end.
So they manage to get the car going again, even after the explosion, which I think is kind of amusing.
Yeah.
They get down to this boat that has, four giant...
You can just see Bond, like, working under the hood with his sleeves rolled up, just tinkering with it. This is what I do.
Yeah.
Actually, I imagine him pulling a bottle of scotch out of his briefcase, pouring it into the engine, it just went. Like,
Yeah.
or he just gives it a, oh, come on, girl, you've got this.
Just
and
a
then
tender
it just goes,
stroke. Yeah.
He rubs the headlights and it goes. Sorry. And so he gets to the boat, and there's four, I guess, gas barrels on it, so that they can make their long journey wherever they're supposed to go. And he heads off. They head off to Venice, and en route,
they are intercepted by was it Spectre?
It was
Spectre,
right?
agent.
And they're
Because by
also
this
in
point,
boats.
they've realized that it's a failed
because we actually
plan.
saw while they got into the boat. Was it before or after the boat when we see Lothlenia again and
Kreb.
Kronstein?
Oh, yeah.
Kronstein.
The chess guy.
Yeah, the
they
chess
get
guy.
called in for.
Was that before the boat scene?
I think so.
Yeah, just at the beginning,
Yeah.
because
Right, yeah. And we get to see Blofeld was admonishing number 3, presses a button, this guy walks out, big assuming guy, and you think
Secondary henchman,
and you think that number 3 is going to die. But she's sweating bullets at this point. Literally, her face is covered in a cold sweat.
Yeah.
And Kronstein gets it.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because Kronstein we don't get much of in this whole movie, but the whole idea is that we're introduced to him in, frankly, one of the most beautiful shot scenes in this whole movie. He's playing chess against this English grandmaster, and they're both grandmaster chess players. And this, God, it's like an imperial ballroom. There's chandeliers, and it's like the grandstands even are bright blue, and the whole thing is teal.
Also Venice?
God knows where. Like, I mean, I mean, did you have
It could have
Venice?
been Versailles. I have no idea. It was just a beautiful palace.
And then on the far wall where the commentators are, there's this giant, like, poster version of a chessboard where they're moving the pieces so people can see what's going on, but they don't have to break eye contact with the other chess player. Like, it's this incredible scene. And then the waiter brings him a glass of water, and on the coaster it says, "They need you now."
with an octopus on it.
With the Spectre octopus on it. And he goes to see Blofeld for the first time. And so...
I like, though, if I
No,
interrupt
please.
it, he gets the message at the bottom of his drink, and he kind of sits there and he thinks about it. He tears it up very deliberately, and then he makes like one more move, and the other guy just says, "Screw it, you win."
I said,
as if he was playing the whole game, just toying with the other guy, and it was like, well, shit, I gotta get out of here now.
yeah. I mean, I said the same thing. So what do you mean? You're saying that at any point this guy was just sitting there ready to make a move that would end the game. And you're like, wow, that is...
Because I expected him to topple his own king and be like, well...
to move himself into checkmate. Like to just...
Well, and
end it. Yeah.
Well, and to me, it's this wonderful scene, and I know this is my protracted rant, but Bond plays cards and Spectre plays chess.
Yes.
Right? Like, that's what this is, right? Because the guy's like, the whole time, it's the long game, and Bond's like, I didn't get 19. That's the end of the game. Like, you know, like, that's what it is.
It's
and
all
this
bluffing,
guy...
it's chance.
Because this is the thing, right? Because the guy walks in, he's like, I'm the chess master. I'm thinking a million moves ahead. And the woman even says, what if this plan fails? Number 3 says, what if this fails? He goes, no. I've thought of every alternative move.
Except the one where you fail.
Because Bond is playing poker. You know, whatever it is, he's the one playing cards.
Huit à la banque.
Yeah, that's how this ends up. Bond's the one who's the quarterback calling the audible, and the guy gets it wrong. And so, like you said, at the end, the Blofeld scene, the heavy comes in, and he has a knife in his boot,
Poison knife,
and all he does, when he the guy plays it out like, oh, maybe he cut his Achilles or something because he kind of stumbles. But no, he's dead. And Blofeld goes, we'll eventually figure out a faster acting toxin. And you're just like, my God, he killed the guy in a second and a half. Like, that's power.
Yeah.
And go ahead, sorry.
And an internationally known chess master, which would require some covering up, I'm assuming. Like,
yeah.
Heart attack.
This isn't Bobby Fischer. Like, he can't just...
Well, their methods
searching for Kronstein.
Their methods of covering up is apparently very interesting. Because that was what they were going to frame Bond with.
Yeah.
That they had the sex tape that they filmed Bond and Tatiana doing.
That's right.
They had that on a film reel and a love note from Tatiana to Bond, and they were going to try and make it... Blackmailing him. And they were going to try and make it as Bond killed Tatiana to stop her releasing that tape, and then turn the gun on himself. Murder-suicide. That was their grand plan to get rid of Bond and Tatiana.
And my favorite part about that is, if this was the modern version of the movie, you know, and especially after watching Tomorrow Never Dies Again, it would have been the headline that what's his name comes up with. Like From Russia with Love would have been that fake headline that the Guardian or the New York Times or the International Tribune comes up with, right? Yes. But instead, it's what he gives to Moneypenny, as though he's the only one in the whole movie
who's that clever,
or she's the only one he loves. Yeah. Right? Like it's the one thing, because this is the one scene where he like leans over and kisses in her ear and goes, "I'll tell you the secrets of the universe," right? Or this, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden the secrets of the world, rather. And then the phone rings and he goes, "Moneypenny, if Bond is still there, tell him to give you the photo." Watch away. And he goes, that's where he wrote From Russia with Love. Like, it's just, every step of the way, people are playing chess when Bond is playing cards, right? And in Dr. No, he's playing solitaire with himself. Like, it's so perfect. He's playing a game with himself. Everyone else is playing a game that requires strategy. Bond is the only one who's like playing off the hip.
One could say that's almost like the meta interpretation of this, that Bond is playing a different game from everyone else. Because obviously he didn't get into the same thing as in Turkey with Britain and Russia. He's doing his own thing, while Spectre is also doing their own thing, but they're also playing kind of the same game. Everyone else is playing chess. Bond is busy playing cards. That's why he wins.
And it's the funny things that he notices along these ways. Why would anyone order red wine with fish? Right? Like
maybe you like red wine.
But that's not what. But again, in the great game, that's not what a gentleman would order.
Well, as a British gentleman, there is no way he would do that. It's a tell. Exactly.
That's exactly what it is.
Perfect.
It's a poker tell. And like at the end of the day, it's almost the most awkward thing about this movie is that another woman has survived that he has to deal with in the next movie, right? Mm-hmm. Tatiana made it to theoretically another film. Right? Bond is
what
leaving
happened
loose
to
end.
her exactly?
The KGB, possibly? Question mark?
I'm guessing it doesn't end well. Certainly not with Bond.
Special branch.
Special branch of something.
So they're on the boat running from Spectre.
Yeah, who finds them?
And then Jack can't let go.
They close in, right? Mm-hmm. And they're shooting out of the boat, and the gasoline gets, or kerosene or whatever, boat fuel gets all on the water, and
it's lit.
Well, they think they have him surrounded, and Bond pulls out this flare gun and shoots it at the fuel on the water, and it goes up and lights all their boats on fire, and they get away. And you get another one of his great quips: "Where there's smoke, there's fire."
But no, sorry. As the English say,
right, yeah.
Which makes me think, A, bullshit, because that's not how that quote works. But B, I was like, as the English say, what? He who smelt it dealt it?
And so, just because it wasn't, the film for that wasn't so, it was just kind of a lot of burning mess and all of that. Now we're in Venice.
And cut.
Now we think everything's hunky-dory. They're in Venice. They're in a hotel room. Bond is hooking up with his contact.
Well, please, as the English say, wrap it up tight. Hey.
And who should walk in but the maid? But wait,
it's Lotlenia.
It's the bad guy. She's dressed as a maid.
And my favorite part about this is she's supposed to be one of the intelligence heads of the KGB, or sorry, SMERSH. And Bond doesn't recognize her at all.
He knows her name, obviously.
Eventually. At first he lets her into the room anyway, and she's just dusting.
Well, like, he knows her name at some point during the movie. Someone mentions her, and he's like, oh yeah, she's the head of whatever. But maybe he doesn't know her by face, but he certainly knows her name.
And it's one of these weird moments where Bond is,
caught off guard.
Right. Because it's the end of the movie. He's like, well, I'm done with this mission, as though he didn't read the last page of the script. And then all of a sudden, someone shows up, oh, I'm here to do some dusting. And in fact, he even answers in Italian, avanti. Come in. And she starts dusting. Bond says, call the porter. I want breakfast. Thanks for... No, they're eating. So it's like, thanks for breakfast. Call a porter. We have to make her flight, And
she tries to walk out with a lector in a suitcase.
Yeah, very subtle.
Very subtle.
It becomes Austin Powers. Frau Forbissina grabs the suitcase, because this is Frau Forbissina. And he's like, no, I'll take care of that one. And she's like, darn it. And then she pulls a Derringer out of nowhere. And I say Derringer, it's the smallest gun I've ever seen. It like
small enough to hide places.
Like fake guns, stage guns are bigger than this. This is smaller than her hand, and this woman is 4'8".
Spy gun.
It's a spy gun, yeah. Considering Bond, the Walther PPK looks small in Sean Connery's hands because he's 6'5" and a bodybuilder, 6'1" as a bodybuilder. This gun is still the smallest. Like he would crush it. He would Dr. No this gun.
So as she gets Tatiana to go out to leave the room that they're going to leave together, then she starts to close the door very slowly, and it's like you're sitting here going, you have an open shot, you don't care about the bullet sound, just do it now. And then Tatiana throws in her scarf or something and distracts her, and causes the whole
But then we get this like interesting scene of a kind of. If it were a shitty movie, it would be a clone of Bond, and like, which is the real Bond? But Tanya has to choose: is she going to shoot Bond or shoot the head of the KGB? Right?
Like, because at this point, she still thinks that that's her boss.
And part of me was expecting Bond to say she's working for Spectre or something, but he never does.
And really, how would you really explain that? It'd be a far-fetched.
I would have thought he'd have to explain something when the guys on the boats attacked them. Because if I were Tanya, my first thought would be like, who the hell are these guys? How do they know we have the Lecter?
Yeah, how do they know where we are? Right?
Yeah, and like the only thought I guess I have is maybe she thinks at this point she's going with Bond? Question mark. But we don't have any establishment.
Well, she's supposed to be like in love with him all of a sudden.
It's weird, and then all of a sudden she has to choose between Bond and her, and there's supposed to be real tension, and we don't know if there's tension, but the second the whatever number 3 shows up, there is tension all of a sudden, which is interesting.
Yeah, I just from Tatiana, like seeing it from Tatiana's perspective, she goes back and forth with the gun. It's just kind of like I don't know. For that, like for the with number 3 and Bond with the knife, there was some definite tension there because there was an impasse at that point. Like he couldn't give up, like let go of her, but he couldn't go anywhere either. Like.
I mean, and then at the end, of course, she shoots the right person, I assume, number 3, and number 5 is dead. Although, we didn't mention this here. She has in one of her heeled boots, a knife, which we assume is also poisoned, and she keeps reaching for Bond, but of course, Sean Connery is a mile and a half taller than she is, so Bond takes this kind of tray and pushes it against
chair. It was
a chair.
So lion taming the Russian,
right? And she can't reach him, and so Bond goes, "Well, she had her kicks."
Hey-o.
Hi-yo! He's a real funny guy. Bond wins the day. Presumably, they make their flight. What's her name?
No, boat trip. They ride off.
They
ride off into the middle distance. Right. That's correct.
When he does the.
Wait.
Right, they end up
on a gondola.
They're on a gondola. Bond, after being very romantic with a woman, takes out their sex tape and throws it into the water.
Well, not before he pulls it out, checks a few frames, and says, thinks to himself, "That's some good stuff," and then throws it in.
I'd like to recreate this one. And then I guess she should have kept her mouth shut. We move on. So, before we end this, because, it's now midnight, what are your final thoughts? Mark, we'll start with you this time. Is this good one, bad one? Where do you think this, Dr. No, we've only done one other.
I think it's fantastic. I really like that there's a lot of the traditional spycraft stuff. You get the sense that he's a fairly realistic spy that's working in this whole environment of the Cold War and everything like that. You get all you get some of the goofy gadgets and stuff, but it's not so far out there that it just loses all realism. Yeah. It still seems like stuff that totally probably actually was happening in the Cold War. Mm-hmm. Like the periscope is a little bit over the top, but I could actually believe it. You know, that kind of a thing.
It's like the Berlin Wall, and where on one side was the KGB guy, one was the CIA guy, and they're just watching each other. Like, I believe that. Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
And that was cool. And I thought that the arch nemesis, the Grant, that was a cool villain. So I enjoyed that. Overall, I thought it was great.
Great. Thank you, Mark. John.
Yeah, this is a good introduction to Spectre because it pits it against the Cold War backdrop that you've got the great powers fighting against each other in a very gentlemanly war. Meanwhile, here's Spectre who's not playing by the rules. And they're a third party that neither one really knows about. And that plays big in subsequent movies where both the Russians and the Americans, or the British, are fighting Spectre.
Yeah.
But, as I said earlier, this is very much like a John le Carré spy movie. This is spy first, Bond really a distant second. There's very few explosions, very few action sequences. It's spycraft, as you said, Mark. That it's Bond being part of a team. He's hunting for things. He's spying for things, and things happen. And it's honestly one of my favorite Bond movies because of that. Because it's not over the top. Because you could imagine this actually happening.
Totally.
And it's still a good movie.
Excellent. And Tim Dalton. I mean, sorry, Thomas Dalton. Tom. What do you got?
So, honestly, I said this to Nick when we first sat down and started watching. This is one of the few Bond movies I've seen the least. I've probably seen it once all the way through in its entirety when I got the DVD box set. And I've seen it probably on Spike during one of the marathons once or twice in bits and pieces. But I think this is going to enter a higher rotation now for me. I really enjoyed a rewatch on this one. I think the spycraft is excellently done. I think it very much harkens back to the early James Bond novels from Ian Fleming's perspective, who was himself an analyst for British intelligence, and kind of just how the missions operated and such as that. And it really feels like there are aspects that are ridiculous and it's still fun, but a lot of it you can believe. I mean, I remember reading about cubby holes in embassies that the opposing side had put in and watched in on. And so while the periscope might be a little over the top, the idea of a spy hole is not.
Yeah.
And it's just it's wonderful, all of that aspect to it. And then even setting up kind of more of the Bond-esque quality in the second half, as Mark put, this is two separate movies stacked on top of each other. It does a great job kind of leading into how Bond acts in future films where it is just him. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very well done. And, I mean, aside from some of the filming aspects at the very, very end, this was very well done.
Thanks. And my final thoughts are, as someone who loves Bond on a panel of people who love Bond, everything I'm going to say is going to sound disingenuous because I'm like, this is the second best movie because the first one, and then there's 24 of them, so they're all the best. I think, though, this is a great movie to show someone who's never seen a Bond movie. And I think the problem is nowadays when you see things like Casino Royale, which, frankly, is probably the best movie that's a Bond movie, but it's not a Bond movie, if that makes sense. Because it's a perfect movie, but it doesn't feel very Bond-ish. Bondage. Let me try this again. It's not a very Bond movie. This movie, though, in the classic sense, really feels like how Cold War spying works. And if you showed someone this who had never heard of James Bond, which is impossible, but if they hadn't, I think they would have just enjoyed this kind of movie. It's paced in a very 1960s way, which feels slow compared to modern movies, but it means that the espionage matters. This isn't Jason Bourne. There's not constantly, my God, this guy at Taco Bell seems familiar, but, oh no, he's trying to attack me with a poison taco. Like, that's not how this works. There's a game afoot, and you're not going to just poison someone by slipping cyanide into, like, shawarma, right? You're not gonna drug the ouzo. You have to get to the point where you have this one moment where, I mean, you make fun now because it's a cliche where the last guy is going to say, I have a plot. And he goes, do you want to hear the plot before you get lasered in the genitals? Sorry, Goldfinger's next week. We'll get there. But there's a reason why you keep someone alive. You keep them alive because they might have information that you can get out of them right before they die, which is what the henchman's doing on the train. He's not just saying, let me tell you what we're doing. It's an information exchange thinking he has the upper hand. This movie works because it's believable spy work in the Cold War. I'd say this is one. If we're going to get to Goldfinger next week, which a lot of people say is the quintessential Bond film. We'll see in 2 weeks whether it is or not. I'd say this is an excellent film, which, like Thomas, I'd seen before, but I don't know if it's the best. Honestly, I think this feels to me what things like Tim Dalton were reaching for. The difference, of course, here is Bond gets a quip. He gets a lighthearted moment. He gets to realize that Q Branch is not evil. He just has to participate. However, unfortunately...
From Russia with love, I fly to you, much wiser since my goodbye to you. I've traveled the world to learn I must return from Russia with love.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping through Amazon.com or the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.